But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I said I've never seen such hideousness in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
Alright, hello and welcome to my OBS won't change scenes with technical difficulties with the Badgers. Sorry guys. Let me see if I can... I don't want to stop this.
Doc, you spoke too soon.
There we go. Okay, it would go back to the buffer. It's there now. Stupid thing, and it dumped my video window. So something must have happened. For fuck's sake, everything has to be hard. And what the fuck? There we go. All right.
We're talking about women versus women. Why progressive women opposed suffrage?
Yes.
I'm trying to fill time while you figure out technical difficulties. Are we good to go?
Yeah,
then let's go.
The damn thing wouldn't show the right window and everything. Like I had it all set up before the show. So and then at the last minute I had to run away from the computer for a second and come back, and apparently the computer got mad. Stupid computer. Anyway. Hello and welcome to Whammon versus Women. I'm Hannah Wellen, here with the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson, and nonsense annihilator, Lauren Brooks. And this may be a wandering discussion. We'll see what happens. I guess it partly depends on what people bring up. It says volume is low. My volume is low. Oh, damn it. Sorry, I just hit the button there. My volume shouldn't be low. Let me see what I've got going on with my microphone. It's not my microphone. Let me turn me up in... Alright, how's that, guys? You'll have to, Good grief. Okay, so we got our first...
It was a minor difference.
Yeah. Super chat, already, we got our first super chat. Brian O'Sullivan, or Bry O'Sullivan, sorry, gave us, $5 GBP. I don't know what that is.
Great British Pounds.
Oh, that's much more than dollars. Or at least it was. And said it's always been a lot of work getting into the start of a HBR thing. It's been almost a decade. Why do we bother still? Well, because there's still shit happening.
And our budget has not increased over the last 10 years.
And to be fair, none of the software that is available at our budget level for this kind of thing is infallible. Everything has quirks, I guess. It's all a little special. We'll just leave it at that. And
at the same time, we do this while we wait for the rest of you to get in.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of you don't get your notification until the live show is live.
Yeah, that's a thing too. That's one of the reasons why I start now with a timer. I start it up a few minutes early and let it run, and then by the time I start, hopefully more people have filtered in. Because if I used to be able to set up the YouTube live stream the night before the show. The Linux won't solve this problem, Richard Bier. The problem is OBS and Restream. And those run separately from your desktop system. It's not a desktop operating system issue. It's a application issue. Any available applications, unless we want to... I don't even know if the stuff that you have to shell out for is better, actually. Because I've seen a lot of streamers with this kind of issue. So, and we do, actually, if I remember right, have to shell out for Restream. So there is that. But yeah, this is part of it is the applications, and part of it is the way that YouTube has fucked up live streaming. because when I first started running HBR Talk, the procedure allowed me, the way that we would run the procedure, it allowed me to create the show, the live stream on YouTube the night before. So I'd go to work Wednesday night, and I'd get my tasks done at work Wednesday night, and I'd get to my downtime when I sit down and I eat. And while I was eating, I could get on my personal laptop and start setting stuff up. And then it would be there, and people would get a notification for it, like, in the middle of the night. So they would have that notification, they would have the email, all the things that YouTube sends out, like this stream is coming up. But since then, we've expanded so that we're streaming on more platforms, and we've also had to deal with the fact that YouTube changed the way that it sets that you set up in such a way that I can't do that anymore. I can't set it up the night before, because Restream, if I don't uniquely set up the YouTube stream correctly in Restream in a way that is different from the way everything else gets set up in Restream, it starts a new stream and ignores the one I set up. So I just let it start its new stream, and I don't set one up ahead of time anymore. So that's why the complexity of this start, because they had to be special. They had to do something weird so that it interfered with the ability to do that and still have it work. It made it so that I had to pay more attention to it, and it's a step where you can fuck up. So I just eliminated that step. That's my way of dealing with, like, okay, I fucked this up 3 times. All right, well, that step, if I can eliminate that step, then I can't fuck that step up. So that's the way it goes. And yeah, sometimes with our stream or with other people's stream, it's copyright crap. Shouldn't be with this, but I try to avoid using for the live stream very much copyrighted stuff. Like, it's one thing to go through and read an article, but you don't see us reacting to videos very much because of that. Like, we do sometimes, but we're real careful about that, because people will take your stuff down for that. And it depends on, like, your criticism and so on, right? Even though that's considered fair use, they'll still take it down. So that's the situation. But in any case, that's all just Badger technical difficulties. So I'm not gonna stay into that. We got this to talk about. We stopped last time at the title for the next sort of chapter of this paper, Why Progressive Women Opposed Suffrage. So just to recap our previous episodes, since like, we've been on and off track, over time with this. Like, we've been talking for a few months about the evolution of suffrage, the right of suffrage in general under English common law, and in the countries that their legal systems are influenced by English common law because they were colonies first of England or of the UK. And of course the United States is one of those. We established, right, that in the English parliamentary system, voting evolved out of a situation where the men who were expected to fund the government with their taxes and to defend the cohesiveness of the leadership and the nation with their blood called on the carpet the leadership for acting and demanding their support, their taxation, or their contributions, because they didn't call it taxes at the time, and both in money and blood, without giving them the right of common counsel without consulting them, basically. So for warmongering and taxation without representation, right? And they went to war over it. The barons went to war with the king twice because he didn't get it the first time. Well, different king the second time. But in any case, that was men. And for 800 years, men have defended that balance. The idea that your government cannot engage in taxation and warmongering that relies on you, the citizen, supplying the money and the blood without you, the citizen, having a say in who's going to be the leader and what decisions you're going to accept from that leader. And all of a sudden, right, in the 20th century, women get in on it. Go ahead.
Well, income tax came in before that. A lot of the stories people tell start with income tax.
Yeah.
And I believe income tax was something to do with the Napoleonic Wars, which were called the Great War at the time. And they said,
there was
we need to bring in this.
Before that.
That's what I'm saying. All of these taxes were proto-taxes before that.
Yeah.
It's just the main bulk of the story begins with income tax. But there was never any wars about income tax, because income tax was brought in because of a pre-existing war, namely the Napoleonic Wars, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I think that's what happened. And nobody protested against the income tax. In Britain, people protested against the poll tax, which Thatcher tried to bring in 1990 or something, and it marked the end of her career. There was so much backlash that she was like, "I'm very sorry, I'm going to have to resign now after 3 terms because the poll tax was such a disaster." And this has happened with so many other kinds of taxes in the last, as Hannah said, 800 years. But it didn't happen with income tax for some reason. People just rolled over and took it, and they were just, yeah, of course. If we earn money, we should give some of it to the government. That makes perfect sense because of the wars they need to fight.
Well, and you have to remember, prior to the concept of income tax, there was with the medieval government system, right? The barons sent their knights, or they sent money so that the king could hire mercenaries. And that's basically what I'm calling a proto-tax, because that was literally funding the king's military with your earnings. And it wasn't, everybody didn't do that, right? The barons did that. That's why the barons had their 2 wars, because they had kings who were using that system to fund wars that the barons thought were not right or not worth funding. And they didn't listen to the barons, so the barons decided to make themselves heard a little bloodier and a little louder. Right? And that's basically how the concept of the concept of parliamentary government came out of the Second Barons' War. Right? And it evolved out of that concept of common counsel, the right of the people who were funding the government with blood and money to have a say in their government. And in terms of, if you look at the history of that has always been a male obligation. There have been times in history, in British history, in British colonial history, in international history, post-British colonial history, there have been times when women have had a say in it. There have been times when women have been invested in having a say in it. But there's never been a time when women have had the same investment as men. Right? There's never been a time when women have been expected to go and fight and die in wars. Even when women started paying taxes. And it's not the same to lose the people you love as to be the one who might die You lose the people you love. It hurts, and it makes your life harder, especially if you depended on them for anything, right? But you live on, and you have a chance to recover from that. You don't usually recover from being dead. It's kind of weird when you do. People get upset and run around sticking wooden stakes in your chest. So, it's not a thing, right? I mean, except for medical weirdness like has happened to me, it's really not a thing, and it certainly wasn't a thing back in the day. So, yeah, it's a completely different evolution. Women come along in the 19th century, really, and started fighting for it. And it's not that women had voting rights historically. It's not that women did not have voting rights. It's that women didn't as frequently do what it took to meet the criteria to exercise voting rights.
The only thing women were ever expected to invest in was men and their families, I guess, but to some degree also men. The government, as long as it existed, was always like, you ladies don't have to pay taxes. You don't have to fight in any of these bloody wars, and you don't even have to get married. But we're just saying it's in your financial interests if you do pair up with a man, like you've been doing for millions of years. If you could just keep doing the thing you've always done and have an iota of confidence in the other half of the human species, that's all you need to do. Just stand by your man. Stuff like that. But that wasn't, they still went, no, we're not standing by men. That's us being oppressed. But we will happily go ahead and stand by the government, because the government is better than men.
Yeah.
Have I nutshelled it enough for you?
What's funny about it? All right. Today, we hear from communists that the things that they are trying to impose on people in the name of politeness. In the name of politeness, you have to accept compelled speech, right? In the name of politeness, you have to give up your family boundaries and your right to determine the influences to which your child is exposed. In the name of politeness, you have to give up your personal boundaries, and you're not allowed to have sexual preferences because that's, that's an infection of isms and phobias. How dare you, right? They're calling that a social contract when it is imposed through shaming and other forms of social pressure, legal pressures, protests, violence, and everything. Social contract. But they don't like the idea that the pattern throughout history wherein men provided a home and resources and protection for women, and in return, women provided men with care, companionship, and consideration, which is pretty fucking easy in comparison, right? They don't like the idea that that was also a social contract. Yeah, well, it's interesting how that works. At least it's interesting to me. We got some super chows. Meredith G gave us $5 and said, HBR Talk 321, honey of the Badgers. There is something I've observed about first wave feminism. As much as it was about female supremacy, it was also a means of women competing for power with each other. And we have all paid for it. Very much so, yes. Richard Beer gave us $5 and said, you might want to look up just when the tax on all telephone lines to pay for the Spanish-American War was finally repealed. Yeah, that took some time. Also, did the barons have more voting power by having a land with more peasants and knights than another less populated land tract? Originally, yes. So you remember, as we've gone through and discussed this, we've we've gone from King Richard all the way up through British history, the evolution of voting in British history. So we looked at centuries of changes to the vote. Now, granted, there were a few centuries where very little changed, and then there were some centuries where there were sudden changes. But from the time that voting was kind of invented or introduced, because it really wasn't invented by any of the Brits. It was invented, if I understand correctly, by the Greeks. But where voting was introduced into British common law, from that time until, I want to say, the 19th century, less than 4% of the population could vote. And wealth did make a difference. In fact, one of the historical documents that we found, or rather writings about a historical document that we found, indicated that people could get multiple votes based on their income, their ability to pay a poll tax, and so on, under the 40 shilling franchise in I want to say pre-Victorian, so that would be Elizabethan, right? Elizabethan times. My brain is like going back through. It might have been later than that, but I want to say it was during a queen's reign. It might have been during a king's reign, and I'm wrong. But so don't hold me to that. In any case, there was one woman that they noted in the article voted 4 times because she was able to pay the fee to do so, and that was normal from the time that the concept of, like, sort of the first proto-vote was introduced to up until they introduced universal voting. So, and Jen Bottle, I'm really not sure. I'd have to go back and look at my notes, which are kind of, there's a lot, so it would take, I'd be sitting there sorting through notes for a while, so I'm not going to try to make a proclamation as to exactly when it happened. You'll have to go back and listen to the shows, because we did talk about that. We talked about that when we read through the article on there was a poll registry that was found just a few years ago, just sometime in the last 10 years, that proved that women voted prior to the Great Reform Act. And what got the suffragette movement started in the UK was the Reform Act that specified men. It didn't prevent women from voting. It just made it more of a rarity than it already was. So that's sort of our history. And the same is true in the United States, right? Like New Jersey, when New Jersey became a state, anybody that was present in New Jersey during an election could vote. And the New Jersey went through a lot of changes there. Wyoming entered the United States with female voting intact. And there were a few others that became states with women voting intact. And of course, the history of women voting in the United States is very much not cut and dried. So there were definitely things that feminists have told us about women's voting rights that are just not true. There were states where voting was male only. And there were states where voting was based on property ownership and taxation and stuff like that. And then there were states where voting was very different from those other states, where you could vote if you were female. So there wasn't a consistent standard across the country until the 20th century, really. In fact, there wasn't a consistent standard across the country until a time period later than the time period we're talking about right now. So even at this point where women are agitating for the vote and other women are saying, no, we don't want it, we don't want it, at that moment there was not a consistent standard across the country for who could vote and who could not vote. So, why progressive women opposed suffrage? The disagreement between suffragists and antis had little to do with progressive versus conservative social agendas. Women in both groups wanted a better world for the next generation, better schools, more libraries and parks, safe food supply, and an end to child labor. Right? Women wanted an end to child labor. And I suspect that part of the reason women wanted an end to child labor was because children competed with women for jobs. Because prior to the industrial age, child labor was just, if your father was a baker, when you got old enough to do tasks consistently and be trustworthy doing tasks, and then where your parents didn't have to worry that you were going to hurt yourself or the business, you became part of the family business. Right? If your father was a farmer, you learned animal husbandry and you learned how to grow plants for food. And if your father was dirt poor, he sent you to somebody else's business to learn how to do that business so that when you grew up you could make a better life for yourself. Because he didn't want you to be trapped in that poverty. And it was usually the father's decision. And in the industrial age it changed because of factories and because of mining. And that change pretty much put children in workplaces that were more visibly harsh. Because everything was harsh prior to the industrial age. It was universally dangerous and scary. And it was not something where, like, if you were under a certain income level, you still had opportunities to get out of that. You pretty much had very limited prospects, and you picked something that was going to be rough on your body, and you were probably not going to live to be as old as wealthy people might, right? But in the industrial age, you had whole families go to work for mining companies, or you had whole families go to work for manufacturing companies. So you had more competition for a paycheck, as opposed to families cooperating for a business that brought money in for the whole family. And all of a sudden, women were competing with other people's kids for jobs. And women were not considered necessarily to be able to do the same jobs that men could do. There were the harshest and most dangerous things were still reserved for adult men, except in circumstances where they needed somebody who was small in order to fit into a location, or in order to manipulate something that took small hands, things like that. And then women and children would end up in competition because women are smaller than men. So I think that the female end of the labor movement wanted kids out of the workplace because that would make it easier for women to A, get jobs, and B, demand more pay. And they did the first thing really well, the second thing not so much. But that's for a whole other series, because the evolution of equal pay didn't necessarily take the same path that feminists like people to believe either. So, in any case, but back to this. Yeah, women wanted more amenities, because up until more recent centuries, there wasn't such a thing as a public education system. You learned to read by reading the Bible with your parents in your home if they knew how to read. And if they didn't, you didn't learn. Unless you were rich, and then your family would hire tutors and you'd learn 4 languages and then not become an interpreter if you were a woman. But yeah, their disagreement was not about goals, but rather about the best way to achieve them. Nor were the antis opposed to all changes in women's status, just those that would force women to adopt men's clumsy political methods, as the antis called them. Some progressive women who took the anti-side were the muckraker journalist Ida Tarbell, although she never joined an anti-organization. Carolyn Corbin of Illinois, who co-founded the Association for the Advancement of Women, and became the president of the Illinois Antis. Agnes Irwin, the first dean of Radcliffe College. Mrs. J.B. Lippincott, who promoted scholarships for women and became a leader of the Los Angeles Antis. Mrs. Gilbert E. Jones of the National League for the Civic Education of Women. Jane Crawley, founder of Sorosis, and I'm sure that everybody listening, that's spelled Sorosis, not and it's not about liver disease. In any case, the president of the New York Women's Press Club, writer Jeanette Gilder, Mary, Mrs. George A. Caswell, because remember, a lot of women back then still acted in their husbands' names, and Anna Head, who founded girls' schools in California and became leaders of the state's anti-associations, and Annie Nathan Meyer, who helped found Bernard College for women in New York, and remained an anti until her death in 1951. Remember, we're told that there was no education system for girls, right? But apparently women were educating girls right along. 6 scholarly books have been published since 1990 on women anti-suffragists, but even these specialized books do not completely explain their motivations. Anne Benjamin discussed all of the antis' reasons as inane, while Thomas Jablonski similarly called their arguments a complex set of rationalizations. Because they've got to characterize them, right? In order to, they got to characterize them negatively in order to poison the waters, poison the well, so that you don't think maybe you should consider their ideas.
Sometimes rationalization is considered a negative process, and sometimes it's considered positive. I mean, being rational is considered positive, but rationalizing things is considered negatives, and that's an important point to try and pin down, because not everything can be solved by rationalization. We are not a rational species. We are animals. We are apes. We are primates. Not everything we think of is rational. A lot of it is defined by our evolution. I dare say most of it is defined by our evolution. And so attempting to explain it with purely rational methods is not going to work, because it's not a purely rational series of decisions. It's a series of decisions that promotes the continuing existence of the species. And yeah, there's an argument to be had over whether if these instinctive intuitions should be at the forefront of our decision making, or whether it should be rationalism. And I'm reluctant to call it an ism, but it's difficult not to, because rationalism is a human invention. Logic is a human invention. I know that's hard for some people to wrap their heads around, because surely logic is inherently ingrained into the universe. No, it's not. Logic is something invented by humans, just like any religion is something invented by humans. It's just like mathematics and science. These are all systems invented by humans to try and help us make sense of the world. And calling something rational doesn't mean it's the truth. As we discovered over the last 4 years or so, where just because you call something the science doesn't mean it's true. Just because you call something rational doesn't mean it's true. And just because you
call something rational doesn't mean it's rational.
Just because you call something intuitive certainly doesn't mean it's true. In fact, that's even worse, and that's sort of what we're facing. That we're at this impasse between rationalism and mythology, I guess. The stories that have kept the human race going for thousands of years. Those things aren't rational either. They're just stories that we've accumulated over the millennia that help us frame things.
Yeah.
It's the rationalizing is not the only way you can frame things, and it's certainly not the only way you can frame things that will create a better world. Because this is the difference between being rational and rationalizing things. You can rationalize things into a state of upside down land. You can use logos, as I believe the Greeks called it. You can appeal to statistics and say, look, these statistics say that this is what reality is like, therefore this must be what reality is like. No, you can fuck around with statistics just like you can fuck around with mythology and faith. None of this is safe.
Yeah. Great example of that is how feminists...
If you put all your eggs in any given basket, then you're in trouble.
Yeah. But a great example of what you were just saying is how feminists look at violence, for instance. And if you look at statistics on various types of violence, one thing that you can figure out from it is that the structures in society that men have created, the laws, the policies, the justice system, the imprisonment system, and all of that men have created in order to maintain peace in society, has emphasized maintaining peace toward women in such a way that the types and scope of violence women face in society, in Western civilization at least, have been reduced to the degree that you have to find a very narrow range of violence in which to say women suffer more than men. And when you consider the conditions under which that violence takes place, the overwhelming majority of it is circumstances where women have gone into a violent environment or exposed themselves to violent people in an environment where the men who would protect them from violence are not present. And that condition kind of has to exist in order for women to experience violence on a higher level, or a level that they consider to be higher than men. And in every other area of violence between humans, men are more often the victims. Right? But feminists will focus, they'll hone in on those individual areas and say, look how bad men are, they do this to women. When the reality is, look how careful men are, women have to get into these circumstances before this happens. right? And those two different ways of looking at it are very much a difference in logic. It's much harder to eliminate violence that occurs because somebody willfully puts themselves in a dangerous situation than it is to eliminate violence that occurs in spite of your efforts to control human interaction in public places. So, yeah, it's one of those things that logic versus rationalization. Feminists rationalize, claiming that women are the bigger victims and that men are more violent people. When you look at those circumstances, one of the things that leads to women experiencing violence under those circumstances is women's own perpetration of violence. And, then they end up in a circumstance where they meet a man who doesn't have any loyalty or any consideration for that taboo against hitting women, and there isn't another man there to tell him no forcefully, and then they get hurt. So and in terms of rational versus intuitive, I would say a good illustration is if you confirm that 1 + 1 is 2, and you confirm that 2 + 3 is 5, it is rational to then conclude that 1 + 2 or 1 + 1 + 3 is 5. Whereas if you look at a set of 5 things, you might be able to recognize intuitively, because you have seen groupings of 5 things over and over again, that there are 5 things there without having to count them. So there you go.
And this is all meaningless if you take that information and then pass it on to the gender studies departments who ask their students, how does the number 7 make you feel? That is a Simpsons reference. But that's
How does the number 7 make you feel? Oppressed. 7 is oppressive.
Exactly. It's perfectly possible to layer superstition on top of rationalization. It's perfectly capable for you to layer modern religion. I'm going to go ahead and refer to wokeness as religion. It's perfectly possible to layer that on top of rationalization and claim that it's all based on logic, whereas it's not. You can start by saying 2 + 2 = 4, and then you add a bunch of gender studies on top of that and say, yes, 2 + 2 does equal 4, unless it involves men and women, in which case a bunch of spells and incantations, and now 2 and 2 does in fact equal 5, as long as it favors women or minorities or foreigners or whatever. And then
well, it's also
you know where it
fun
goes from there.
it's also fun to watch postmodernists try to argue against this. One of the most frustrating ones I got into on social media with a postmodernist was the idea that 2 + 2 does not always equal 4 because there are other factors that can be involved in measuring things in ways that are not addition. So, for instance, 2 sound waves plus 2 sound waves does not equal 4. Well, their logic for that was to take it from, we are counting the number of sound waves that we start with, to if you pump them toward each other, as you make the sounds toward each other and the sounds intermingle, you get a totally different type of calculation. But the addition takes place before that calculation. How many sound waves are we dealing with in this situation before we start actually seeing how they mingle? Well, the answer to that would still be 2 + 2 = 4. And it really frustrated the other person when I pointed that out, because no, we're not saying that 4 is the answer to what happens when you mingle sound waves. We're answering how many sound waves did we mingle. And then this bothers people. If you go back to the actual equation, the thing that you're discussing, well, addition is about counting things, and really all math is either positive addition or subtraction, which is negative addition.
And this all culminated in this hippy dippy progressive takeover of quantum physics, as many of you will have discovered over the past few decades. Yeah. They sort of go, well, but if you can't see 2, then for all we know, quantum physically, 2 could be 2.49 recurring, and so 2.49 recurring plus 2.49 recurring must mean 5, and they do all this bullshit, and they take the uncertainties of quantum physics, and they say, well, now everything is uncertain. Now we can't say anything about the universe because we found some scientists who have discovered that we cannot accurately predict things at the subatomic scale. Therefore, when a woman abuses a man, it's a man abusing a woman. Isn't it funny how that works? Stuff like that.
And so when you look back in history, it's easy for them to then rationalize that all of the concerns that women had that didn't want women to get the vote must have been invalid concerns, must have been a complex set of rationalizations, must have been inane, must have been ultra-conservative, and therefore, by being ultra-conservative, that suddenly makes them invalid. Which it doesn't, by the way. It doesn't determine anything about validity. Yeah. It goes on, sociologist Susan E. Marshall pointed to gendered class interests to explain the antis' motivation, although she also wrote that the women antis were generally drawn from the same social class as suffragists. So it's kind of difficult to call it class versus class if they were from the same class. It wasn't wealthy women not wanting the vote versus poor women wanting the vote, right? It was wealthy women versus wealthy women, because the women who were not wealthy were too busy going to work and helping their husbands to support their families. Susan Goodyear wrote that women antis in New York supported patriarchy, benefited from it, because other women apparently didn't, and preferred to maintain their traditional roles as protectors of the home and family. They knew how good they had it. While these explanations have merit, they still leave one wondering why hundreds of thousands of middle and upper class women campaigned for decades against their own political rights. Alina C. Green wrote about Southern women's reasons, but most of them, fear of black voters and lingering resentment over the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, apply only to the South. So you also had differing political attitudes there, right? Some women didn't want the vote because they were afraid that it wouldn't be reserved for white women. But then the white women that were arguing for the vote wanted the vote because they did not want white women to not have the vote if black men were going to have the vote. So you had racism on both sides there. That was pretty prevalent back in the day.
But they sorted it all out in the end.
Yeah, they did.
They were like, yeah, this is tricky, but what we're going to do is white native straight men are the problem.
Yeah.
And if anyone argues with us, we'll just arrest them. And that's what we're doing now. It's much like the problem we have in the UK at the moment is we have a government that assumes they just own us. They consider the British people to be their property, and so it doesn't matter how much they abuse us because we are their property. And this is much the sake with dare I say white women. It's spread a lot further since then, but what we see in the history of feminism is women claiming ownership over the men of their own country, which in this case means white women claiming ownership over men, which goes some way to explaining why on earth feminists seem to have this alliance with Islam, and why they feel it's perfectly okay for the white men in their own country to be endlessly oppressed by the blameless brown men from this other faith. And it's because they own the men of their own country. They don't own the men from those other countries. They're going to leave it to the women of those other countries. They're going to leave it to the women of those other faiths to keep those men in line. It's not their job. Their job is to keep white men in line. And this goes some way to explaining why it started with feminism. It started with these multi-tiered gender politics, and then once that was established, they went on to these multi-tiered racial politics. It's because, yeah, I'm gonna say it because we're on Honey Badger Radio. It all started with women who decided that their own men were their own property, not their own companions, not their own fellow human beings with whom they can start some kind of family life. No, they consider white women consider white men to be their own property. There's a racist element to it, but that always took second fiddle to the sexist element of it, which is that women should own men. And like I say, this then mutated in the university system to white women should own white men, but those are the only men they should own. If any other men come in, then we'll just look the other way, as and when they rape us in the thousands. Because, yeah, that's a bit of a setback. We're not exactly happy with how many foreign men are raping us, but that's not the point. The point is we own our men, and we should be able to do whatever we like with them. And we haven't finished doing whatever we like with them. What we want to do with them, incidentally, is erase them from history. We want every single white man in the West to identify as a woman, and then we will have officially extradited masculinity from our culture. And in the meantime, a bunch of foreign men came in, and they were like, "Okay, well, this throws a wrench into our system. What do we do about these foreign men?" Well, it doesn't matter. We don't own those foreign men. The foreign women own those foreign men. So those foreign men can do whatever they like, and we'll just blame our men for that because we own those men. We can't do anything about these ethnically foreign and religiously foreign men. We don't own them. All we can do is crack down even further on the men that we do own, and that's European men in this case.
They're playing a long game there. What you discussed is a step toward women with an in-group bias toward the entire sex, regardless of other demographics, owning all men. And women in Western culture, white women in Western culture, see women from other cultures having... Is one of the things that feminists eliminated, actually, or really cut down on in Western society. What they have, a higher degree of sexual power over the men around them, and a higher degree of the power of their vulnerability over the men around them. So women in cultures where they are still subject to something similar to coverture, and they are able to, within that system, make demands of men or have expectations of men, where it's a man's job to protect women from the harsher realities of life. That comes with a level of power. If men are obligated to protect you from the harsher realities of life, then being victim at any point of the harsher realities of life is a weapon that you can use to manipulate men, right? And if sexuality between the sexes, heterosexuality, is very restricted and very protected, and monogamy is very restricted and very protected, then being a victim of sexual exploitation, sexual exposure, sexual predation, ogling, any kind of, aspect of male sexuality being open or male sexuality being unrestrained is, again, a weapon women can use against men. And feminists don't think about this, but consciously for the most part, but academic feminists, they do. And they're the ones that sort of introduce the idea that Western women should not judge stuff like women being expected to completely cover their bodies in other cultures, or women being expected to not show their secondary sexual characteristics, the curvature of their legs, the curvature of their belly, the cleavage of the breasts. That information is kept from men in some cultures because it is a weapon that women are able to wield to control a man's attention and a man's loyalties and a man's sense of obligation. Right? And in Western culture, feminism has normalized handing that information out to men so freely that it is also normalized for it to not work as a weapon to command a man's loyalties or a man's sense of obligation in any way. Right? You're not vulnerable when you're showing your cleavage, at least not openly. You may be able to command a man's attention, but you're not victim of that attention. And so they've been fighting really hard for the last 10 years to return to a state where women can consider themselves victim of that attention despite seeking it and despite openly exposing themselves to it. And they haven't been able to achieve that. Right? So they're embracing the mass import of people from cultures where it is normal for women to withhold that information and to have that power. And unfortunately, there is a pattern that is taking place in the world right now. And like I said on Tuesday, related information would be the fact that when, in the United States, our administration passed a law that said if Cuban refugees could get 1 foot on the beach in Florida, they had a right to stay. Castro emptied out his prisons and his mental wards and put them on rafts and sent them here. Women didn't think about that. They didn't think about that, and now they're suffering. And I don't feel sorry for them, because they brought this on themselves. I do feel sorry for children that this is happening to. I don't feel sorry for adult women who voted for this. And I know there are some women who didn't vote for it. But out of politeness mostly imposed by women, they didn't say anything about it. Right? And that's happening all over the world. So, yeah, we're still seeing women versus women. And Night Motorcyclist pegged it right there. Most women voted for it. Most women demanded it. And among the women who didn't, most didn't speak up about it. Very, very few. Because they didn't want to look anti this religion or that. They didn't want to look racist, xenophobic, homophobic. They didn't want to look guilty of the isms and the phobias. Because those were their rules, right? If you disagree with us, you are infected with the isms and the phobias. So therefore, we have to follow the rules of the isms and the phobias, and how they create limitations on what we can say. And women who do speak up, women who do buck the rules of, being guilty of the isms and the phobias, get heavily condemned for it. Almost as much as men. Right? They get excommunicated from the sisterhood. And they get treated like something is wrong with them mentally. And pretty much nobody listens. So, because all the other women are screaming for tolerance. So, you get what you tolerate. Kind of sucks, doesn't it? Let's see. We are at Southern resentment of federal amendments was so fierce that Kate M. Gordon, who had been a vice president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, actively campaigned against ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, setting up a table in the lobby of Nashville's Hermitage Hotel. Similarly, and that would be this group of women right here in this picture. Let's see. Similarly, Laura Clay of Kentucky and Ann Pleasant of Louisiana had worked for suffrage, but then fought against its enactment by a federal amendment. Women aunties made several dozen arguments for their position, many of which seem trivial or even silly today. For example, civics should be taught by non-partisan women. Suffrage would increase the cost of elections and so on. Well, it did, so there is that. It is hard to believe that anti-suffragist Mrs. Arthur M. Dodge, who was prominent in the same New York social circle as the Rockefellers and the Astors, really cared that women's suffrage would increase the cost of elections. Yet she made that argument in a New York Times article, see Figure 4, and this would be the article, which we could go through and read that article, but we are not going to do that today. I'll probably take a look at this and see if it's worth an episode or a video or something like that, analyzing it, and get to it at a future time if it is. If I remember right, I think it might be. But I wanna stick with this first. So why did hundreds of strong, capable, civic-minded women oppose their own right to vote? To help solve the puzzle of what motivated the antis, this author interviewed 2 great-granddaughters of Mrs. Arthur M. Dodge. Each had learned of Mrs. Dodge's motivations from family lore. Andrea Dodge said Mrs. Dodge was concerned that women were generally uninformed about politics and not yet ready for the vote. Polly Brown said that even without the vote, upper-class women had significant power to influence lawmakers. And Mrs. Dodge was concerned that they would lose that power if they entered partisan politics. These 2 reasons, women were not ready and more power without the vote, are rarely mentioned today, and they require some explanation. And from my personal perspective, I would say this. Women could appeal to the Congress, to the president, to the media, to their local politicians, to their the male voters through the power of female fragility and victimhood and women's interests, and have control over all of those institutions just by virtue of saying, this is the only way we can get this if you stand up for us. As long as they had no other say in the matter. They had no other control over the matter. But you can't be victim of something that you're voted for. Like I just said about, you get what you tolerate. Well, if you have an active role in making it happen, it's not somebody else's fault, and you're not a victim of it. You might suffer from it. You might not like the consequences, but they are your consequences. If you steer your car over a cliff, you're not a victim of the impact when you hit the bottom. You have suffered the consequences of your own choices. And women then knew the distinction would change how much influence they would have in politics. If women could vote, then they would have to rely on women to vote. Because men could vote in their own interest. They wouldn't have to worry. If women wanted something, women would vote for it. Right? Politicians didn't have to worry. If women wanted something, they would vote for the politicians that would listen to them. Right? So if male voters outnumbered women voters, if the suffragists got the vote for women and then only a minority of women voted, women would lose political power instead of gaining it. So their first explanation, the problem of the uninformed voter. Alexander Kisar has written about the problem of the uninformed voter in relation to women's suffrage. As he pointed out, the idea of universal suffrage was popular around 1850, but became unpopular in the middle and upper classes by 1880. Because millions of voters were recent immigrants who were illiterate, which meant they would not be able to read the news, by the way, because you didn't have news presenters on a television giving it. It was only written. So because millions of voters were recent immigrants who were illiterate, unfamiliar with democracy, or inclined to sell their votes for liquor or money, many people were concerned that America's experiment with democracy might turn out to be a disaster. The absence of the secret ballot made the selling of votes easy at the turn of the century. Each political party would print and distribute its own color-coded ballots. Kisar argued that in such a chaotic and corrupt environment, the main obstacle to women's voting was not so much opposition to women voting as opposition to allowing any more voters at all. One progressive woman who shared this concern was journalist Jane Grey Swisshelm, who had outstanding credentials as a fearless and pioneering feminist. Swisshelm wrote in 1889, so we didn't even just have women versus women, we had feminists versus feminists here. Right? Swisshelm wrote in 1889 that the government was already staggering under the ballots of ignorant, irresponsible men. She strongly opposed women's suffrage and believed that if women got the vote, the government could not exist for another 10 years. So she didn't understand women. What happened when women got the vote? Right. In 1910, what was it, 1910? It was before, in 1900 there was, if I remember right, almost no taxation from a federal level. And when they started agitating for women's suffrage, there was no income tax at the federal level. None. Now, the upper levels pay more of their income than they get to keep. Unless they can find ways to get out of it. And women's voting has manipulated the ways that they're able to do that. So that one of the ways that companies get out of it is engaging in DEI hiring. So government grew after women got voting rights. And it grew exponentially. It grew, the bureaucracy that we have today grew out of the many things that changed during the 20th century in regard to the function of the federal government after women got their voting rights. Rather a strange thing. Exponentially. Yeah, gin bottle. It's crazy though when you think about it. Early American women who did not have to earn their own money and were accustomed, if their husbands had a significant amount of money, to spending his money to make themselves look good, doing nice things for other people. Translated that into spending your money through government.
At this point in history would be a very good time for the West to start apologizing for feminism.
Yeah.
Like, if we were to apologize for anything, it would be that. Because it did happen on our watch, whatever the fuck our means, whatever the fuck we means anymore. The state of identity politics has got to the point where we have to be very careful what we describe as our or we. But we're at that point in history where, I mean, the worst thing the West has done to the rest of the world is, well, I'm going to say number one is feminism, number two is democracy. But feminism is worse because at least we're... democracy is the thing we're saying we're doing. We're sailing across the world, invading every country and saying, you have to be democratic or we'll shoot you.
Right.
But at the same time, democracy isn't the worst of these things. While the West has spread democracy, they've also covertly spread feminism. And I don't think it's democracy that people are really objecting to. I think it's the feminism. I think it's this very idea that that men should bow down to women and give them everything they want, as though that's an out there idea that no one's ever thought of before.
You think about it, feminism is bullshit, right? We know that feminism is bullshit, and bullshit is fertilizer. Democracy is bleach. It sort of takes all of the character out of government by putting it in the hands of the mob. So it sort of whitewashes it, not in terms of making it under the control of white people, but of, like I said, taking the character of government out. Instead of being responsible for the people, government becomes beholden to the people. But what happens when you mix fertilizer and bleach? It develops absolute destructive power, right? It blows your hands
Any
off.
living space.
Not a good result. Mixing feminism with democracy has been the worst disaster, political disaster in American history. It's been a long, slow train wreck over the last few centuries.
And we found ourselves in a position where the European West is apologizing for the rest of the world for everything except the things we should be apologizing for. Yeah, I'm not sorry that we gave you indoor plumbing. I'm not sorry that we gave you electricity and fucking ballistics and all this stuff. But there's a little part of me that is sorry that we gave you feminism and democracy, and that our governments to this day are still trying to sell you this fucking grift about how if you put women in charge, that will improve your society. I can't imagine any lie in the history of humanity has been as lie-y as that.
Yeah.
Good lord.
NovaFan21 gave us $1 and said, "When I was a kid, I always thought it never made sense how a dictator can just promise stability and suddenly everyone signs up for it. Seeing feminist propaganda to this day made me understand." Of course, there's also the thing that happens with dictators a lot of times is that they get a segment of the most well-armed and most strategically educated people in society to sign up for their dictatorship, and then they just impose it on everybody else. But then again, and under democracy, we have ended up with a public education system and a military and police force that kind of does the same thing. So there you go. And I will point out, Man suggested, Islamic countries will never adopt feminism, though. Islamic morals are quite backward, but at this point they are much closer to reality than the West. I don't think people realize how gynocentric Islam is.
Exactly, thank you. Yes. It's not just gynocentric. It's feminist.
Yeah.
It's just that we don't. There is no direct translation between what the Arabs call it's Islam and what we call feminism. It's just several steps ahead. Islam just got to the point where we're so terrified about all those bad men raping our perfectly good women that we have no choice but to wrap them up in garbage bags so that nobody can see them anymore. And it's just endlessly frustrating that the so-called right wing, the so-called red pillars, the so-called tradcons look at this and go, "Oh, this is men oppressing women." No, this is men protecting women, and you're going down this same path where all that matters is protecting women, and you're headed for the same place because that's all you can think of, because there's no room in your brain for the concept of women protecting men. What? How would that even work?
This is the thing. Throughout human evolution, female sexual power has been a thing, right? Women and adolescent girls of the age of fertility, I guess would be the best way to put it, have always had the power to command the attention of the opposite sex, to command the sympathy of the opposite sex. the interest of the opposite sex, the dedication of the opposite sex, the compassion of the opposite sex, by flaunting their sexuality, by flaunting their attractiveness, by using the sexual magnetism between themselves and the males around them of their age and older to manipulate and control. That's not something that just materialized after civilization evolved. I mean, civilization evolved around trying to navigate that as people began living closer and closer together, and technology changed the way that we gathered resources and shared them among a community. Feminists don't want people to talk about this, but resource acquisition and distribution evolved around women's ability to use their sexuality, to use their sexual power to gain a bigger share for themselves and their offspring of that distribution. And so that natural tendency, that natural behavior, that had to be controlled in closer civilization, because once you had higher population, you had unintended consequences of women trying to do that. They might target man A, and they might get attention from man B, who they didn't want attention from. And women have the power of playing victim of that consequence, and men will fall for it. Right? So the admonition, the requirement, the expectation that women cover their bodies. Women initiated that, and men initiated that to protect women from male sexuality. The other side of that equation is the pull of female sexuality drags on male sexuality. If male sexuality didn't reciprocate, women wouldn't be able to use, look at me, I'm vulnerable, look at me, I'm fertile, look at me, I'm a mother, look at me, I'm attractive, to get a bigger share of resources. And they also wouldn't be able to create a circumstance where they are victim of seeking attention and resources from male A and getting attention they didn't want from male B. So that covering of the skin was about protecting women from male B. And it was far more about protecting women from male B than it was about protecting male B from embarrassing himself or getting himself into trouble by paying attention to the wrong woman. Although it does that. It does do that. But it is more about demonizing men as predators than it is about demonizing women as sluts. So when you look at cultures where we view as a society, not we personally because I don't, but we as a society view women as oppressed because they have to cover their bodies? No. What that's telling people is that access, even visual access, to knowing what a woman's body looks like is very restricted in society. It's privileged information, and only a few people are allowed to have it. Women get to decide who they are, even if they're in arranged marriages. They get to decide how they respond. Right? So, yeah, it's definitely not an anti-feminist society. Feminism preys on gynocentrism. And gynocentrism is unfortunately fairly widespread. I don't know of any society in the world that doesn't have some degree of gynocentrism.
We all require some kind of recipe of liberty and authority. It's difficult to say that. The small L libertarian in me is going, no, we don't need any authority ever, but we do, because we're always in danger of if some kind of movement comes along, they can take authority and liberty and stretch them off into two different realms, where women get all the liberty and men get all the authority. That's what's happened in the West and beyond it, into the communist East as well. They just don't talk about it much. It's but you get what I mean. If you draw no distinction between authority and liberty, then you make yourself vulnerable to movements that can divide you, based along lines that are sort of evolutionarily ingrained, such as we should protect the women. Men should protect women more than women protect men. That sounds non-egalitarian, but it's just how the world works. It's how every mammal species works. Women do need to be protected more than men, because women are the ones who get pregnant, and they can. A woman can only get pregnant from one man every 9 months, whereas a man can impregnate multiple women. It's not even a moral thing. It's a matter of ergonomics.
Well, I will say this. You can't just, there's natural gynocentrist arguments include the idea that you could take the male population down significantly lower than the female population and still be able to repopulate the earth. But I want to remind people that inbreeding causes serious problems in the human genome. And it's not just humans, like other animals have this problem too. You know, cats have, like house cats, different breeds of house cats in the United States now that have been very popular, like Siamese cats, have inbred health problems like blindness that have occurred as a result of inbreeding. But in terms of gynocentrism versus the logic of protecting motherhood, one is about children and the other is just about women. And there is no reason in the world for the one that is just about women to exist at all. Because aside from being baby makers, there isn't anything about women that makes us more valuable than men in any way. In fact, if you look at what women do in the world besides making babies versus what men do in the world, and I'm talking about all of the history of human civilization, we are less valuable than men. Everything that's happened in human history, aside from maintaining the population, aside from giving birth and raising children, all of the building of human civilization, all of the structure, all of the rules and regulations, all of the how it works together, right? Every aspect of that came from masculinity in men. Maybe men might not have been inspired to do parts of it if there were no women. If the human race had a way of reproducing asexually and there was no such thing as sex and women didn't exist and it was just, the default was male or whatever, maybe there would have been things, comforts and so on, that would have been less attractive for humans to build. But for the most part, things like safety and sanitization, cleanliness, basically, medical advancements, technological advancements, we'd still have all of that. Women have contributed very little to it. It's an ugly thing to have to admit about my own sex, but it's a fact.
It's an evolutionary fact. Women never needed to evolve beyond what was required to make children, and I'm focusing this around the word need, because it's the backbone of evolutionary theory. Need. Things evolve these way because they need to evolve this way. Women never needed to perform much except having children, because it was such a commitment for the female body. But men still had this sense of need, and it extended so far beyond just what is essentially a chemical reaction that happens in a woman's body, because that's always been what women needed to do, this chemical reaction. But while they evolved this, men evolved a very different kind of need, a much more complex kind of need, and it's to do whatever it takes to make sure that these young'uns survive. Something that doesn't just involve a chemical reaction that happens automatically inside your body. It's something that happens in all kinds of layers in your brain as you empathize with the women who are having your children, whether or not you know they're your children. and you focus everything that a woman focuses biologically on gestating this child, a man focuses psychologically on raising this child, whether or not he knows he's even doing it for the sake of raising the child. This is why men have all of these psychological incentives. There was this brilliant meme that went around a couple of months ago. Like, the top of it was, men only think about one thing. And then they show this picture of a guy, and then all these captions saying, I need to succeed. I need to do the best for my family. I need to make more money. I need to, and it's all these I need things, and it struck a chord with so many people, because it's like, yeah, that is what it's like being a man. You are forever dogged by these feelings of I need to do better, and in many ways it's a curse, and in many ways it's a blessing, and it's why human beings have dominated the earth for so many thousands of years, because we have this dualized system of women who think everything should be about them, and men who think everything should be about someone else. And that seems like a very unequal, a very unequitous state of affairs, but that's where we are. And the least we can do is acknowledge that that's where we are. We are a sexual species. We have two different kinds of human being. One of them is very, very focused on their own well-being. The other is very, very focused on anything but their own well-being. And that's weird, to quote Tim Waltz. Yeah. When you play it, when you sound it out like that, it sounds weird. And yeah, it is. But it's how we got here. Because we have two different kinds of human. One that loves itself. One that also loves fucking women. And we can continue with this. As long as we acknowledge that that's the case. As long as we have these fucking Gnostic upside down land clowns telling us that actually it's men who love themselves and it's women who hate themselves. It's going to be very hard to explain to future historians how the fuck this happened. But yeah, this happened.
I mean, even modern historians don't understand it.
Yeah.
Modern historians don't understand the real reason why women are miserable. Right? There is a stark difference in the way boys and girls are raised. And it's been that way throughout a long part of history. And I know I talked about the compassion idea of the previous social contract, where a man's job was to protect and provide, and a woman's job included having compassion for him, meaning that when he comes home from work, or when work is done for the day, if work is at home, which it isn't always, done for the day when work is at home, that because she has that compassion, she would want to try to alleviate his fatigue and his pain and suffering from the labor that he has spent hours and hours engaging in. And that was why women waited on men hand and foot back in the day, because they cared, and it was their role, their job, to be caring in that manner, to be the caregiver. And a lot of women today who work go into caregiving jobs because we have that instinct to be the caregiver. And we're still doing that for our families as well, and it's exhausting. Women are miserable, though, for an entirely different reason. Like, feminists would stop at that point and say, well, see, there you go. It's society's fault for making women be the caregiver, even though I just described it as an instinct. Right? Girls are raised to get access to resources by expressing discontent. Boys are raised to get access to resources by engaging in proactivism. Get it yourself, do it yourself, help produce it, help make it happen. It used to be, in pre-feminist days, that women had roles in, if not acquisition, in preparation of resources, in storage of resources, in preservation of resources. So you actually had some level of proactiveness in women. But today, our roles in resource acquisition, in resource maintenance in our homes and our families, is not consistent with what we're raised to do in order to gain access to the social resources that we need, right? And as a result of that, women are trained from childhood to make discontentment their main state of mind. Whereas men are trained from boyhood to make problem solving their main state of mind. Women are trained to see problems and worry about problems. Men are trained to solve problems. Do you see the problem that causes, right? The problem is women are trained to think that it really is not about the nail. Women are trained to need the nail to stay in place in order to maintain that level of discontent so that they can get the resource of your compassion in order to command other resources from you. Gotta have that nail in place, gotta still complain about that nail so that you will give safety and protection, food, shelter, clothing, money, love, care, concern. Take the nail away, women have nothing. It is absolutely about the nail. The nail is a woman's tool.
1,000%.
Yeah. And because of that, women are miserable. Because they have to be.
Right. And it's not exactly, they have to be. And it's not even that they have to be, they choose to be. You know, and the reason that these people are scratching their heads, oh, I don't know why. Well, because sometimes the blame has to lay at the feet of women. You know, sometimes you have to actually blame women. It's your choices that put you in this situation that make you absolutely miserable. You know, it's not what they try. I guess, I don't know if it's a therapy thing, but it's like, you know, push the blame outward. It's not my fault. It's what this person or these people or society or government, whatever, has done to me. It's because of this situation that they put me in, not what I chose to do, you know, or how you choose to react. I mean, geez, everything. What's the saying? 90% of life is how you react to it, right? Or not what you do or how you react to whatever the fuck. But you know what I'm saying. It's not what happens to you. It's how you react to it, right? And women are just horrible. They do not possess the ability, the coping mechanisms to deal with the fact that, oh my God, I did it again. You know, and oh my God, I have to sop up all this fucking sorry gravy with my I did this biscuit and come to the fucking reality that maybe I shouldn't do this again. You know, but no, because women operate off of emotion, not logic. You know, no kind of reasoning. The only reasoning is that it made me feel good, or this is what I wanted, or I you know, it's intangible.
Yeah.
So their expectations do not fall with any kind of, you know, purview of reality. Why do you think they're upset? Why do you think they're depressed? They want what they can't have because they're making the stupidest decisions in life. And, you know, no one is there to tell them. Nobody will tell a woman that she's done anything wrong. Absolutely no one. Even when she's 1,000% in the wrong. There's always going to be someone who's going to say, well, I understand. And she's been through a lot. And where. You have to stop that. The only way to correct it is to stop that behavior. You have to stop holding women's hands through every fucking thing in life. You know, sometimes you gotta get the scraped knee. You know, sometimes the scar you have to open the wound again a couple of times, but you gotta let the shit heal.
Yeah. Yeah, and the fact of the matter is, we don't have to train little girls growing up that the way that they gain compassion from other people, that the way that they acquire resources, the way that they get their needs met, is to be discontent, you know, to experience discontent and express discontent. We can train little girls growing up that the way that they get their needs met should be the same as the way boys get their needs met, by being proactive, by solving problems, by going out and doing and getting and being instead.
Well, you know, I think that
and I will put this way: a lot of women will not like hearing this because they get upset when another woman throws away the nail.
But that feeds right into what I was just about to say. And I think that we're beyond the point of even talking to women or trying to change their behavior. We gotta talk to the men. We gotta talk to the men and tell them that, teach them how to recognize this behavior and how to not fucking put up with it. That's really the only way they're going to learn, because women will not listen. They won't listen to other women. You know, the only time they listen to other women is when they're in agreement with them. You know, and then any other opinion or truth be damned. You know,
Yeah.
it's up to men, you know, to also step up and say, listen, no, you did this shit. I'm not talking to you anymore. You're X'd out of my life. Whatever it takes. You just stop putting up with this shit. Stop giving excuses to women. Stop saying, oh, well, yeah, I know she's a single mother, but, you know, she's a good woman. You know, stop it. The bar is set way too low. Your standards have to rise up, gentlemen, because these women they will, the ones that get past your radar will get in there and ruin your fucking life. It's what they do.
Yeah. But it's not just about interpersonal relationships. I mean, from my perspective, what I look at this in terms of is how all of civilization works. One of the things that has been a big problem for men is that the mechanisms of government are under women's control. And they have been for about a century now. Pretty much ever since women got the vote, right? And it's partly because there's a percentage of men that are always going to vote in women's interests, or in the interests that they are told are women's interests.
Right.
And then there's an unfortunate percentage of men that doesn't vote at all, that are, you know, it's a bigger percentage than the percentage of women who don't vote. And the result basically has been women using government as a tool for social engineering. And men are not going to be able to escape that social engineering until they unify in large enough numbers to outnumber the simps who will vote in what they are told are women's interests, and band together with the small number of women who realize that actually what everyone is told are women's interests are not good interests for any part of the human race, and need to be stopped. And start dismantling the system of social engineering within government and take it back to what it was originally intended to achieve, which was national unity, and an ability between the states to maintain travel and commerce, and an ability between the states to organize national defense. Like, that's all government needs to do. It doesn't need to do more than that. And when it's being used the way it's being used today for a complex system of social micromanagement through legal imposition of feminine ideas of politeness, men will always suffer, children will always suffer, and women will always suffer and refuse to admit that that is why. Right? Men need to take control of their families. And you can't take control of your family if that social engineering mechanism gives women the right to abandon you and take the family with them. So men need to take back control of the government. It's unfortunate, because it's like taking control of the One Ring from the Lord of the Rings. You know, it's like taking control of a nuclear bomb, or the world's worst poison. And unfortunately that's the only way to do it, because it's actively being used. And until you take control of it and put a stop to that, you're never going to have any success in any of the endeavors that the men's rights movement engages in. We have little bits here and there. Right? We've had some ability to at least scare the shit out of conservatives, to the degree that they will agree to legislation that gives fathers equal custody rights and divorce. in some states. But it's a small step, and it took a long time to get there. 200 years. So yeah, you just got to take it back, and you got to do it no matter how loudly women yell, no matter how angry they get, no matter how much they accuse you of being the bad guys. Right? Just like your teenage daughter calls you a monster for grounding her because she dated, some guy that you could see having 27 mugshots in the future. Women are going to get pissed off about you doing that. But that doesn't make it wrong. Women get pissed off about a lot of things that should happen. We got a super chat from Zeranks, who says, gave us $5 and says, I don't think that's compassion, Hannah. We probably think it is because of how our POV changes depending on whether we're dealing with men or women. My thinking is compassion is like kindness. Neither can exist without the existence of rebuke and forgiveness existing. Women are generally treated as though they can't do certain things or they're beyond certain behaviors. That's usually granted to children up to toddler ages because they don't understand what's going on and only know what they want. This, by the way, came through at 8:32, so it's been here for a while, so it's not the most recent thing I said that he's referring to. That's coddling. I maintain that there is no compassion and only coddling for women, especially in the West. If there was actual compassion, women would understand how they protect the men that serve them, and men would continue to protect women because we know they're part of the means through how our species survives. And yeah, it's not compassion to coddle women, right? But what I was talking about in the moment I think that you're responding to was compassion for when women suffer consequences of natural phenomena that maybe they don't fully understand. So something bad happens to another person and they're in pain and they're suffering. Women can get men to have compassion for that pain and suffering when it's a woman experiencing it. The unfortunate thing is that it does result in coddling, where women make stupid choices. They play stupid games and they win stupid prizes, and then men go, oh, I'm so sorry that you ended up burdened with that stupid prize. I'll take on the burden of alleviating you of that burden and relieving you from dealing with it, right? That's not compassion, that's coddling. And, what women need to experience, what little girls need to experience growing up, is that when they play little kid stupid games and they win little kid stupid prizes, their dads need to respond with, well, what did you learn? You won't do that again, will you? We just spent all day at the hospital because you stuck your foot in hot coals to find out if they were hot, and they were. So what did you learn to do before you make a decision like that? Like my dad did. That's what I got to hear when I did that. What did you learn? Once they knew I was okay, we went to the hospital and I had like all the antibiotics and examinations, and the doctor decided I didn't need to be hospitalized, and they sent me home with my foot wrapped in so many bandages it looked like a cast, and instructions on what to do to take care of the actual injury. My dad had a very serious talk with me about thinking, what could happen if I do this before I did things? Right? That's usually something that happens with boys. But it's not always something that happens with girls. And I'm kind of lucky that I was the older sibling, because my parents didn't have an excuse then to look at an older sibling and say, why weren't you watching her? Because they would have. That was, baby boomers did that a lot with the older sibling and the younger sibling, right? Why weren't you watching? That's your job. You're the older sibling. I know that because I was the oldest. But since I was the oldest, I got the what would you got to think about what would happen if you do this talk. Every kid should have that lesson from their parents, male or female. And if every girl grew up having that lesson drilled into her head, we would not have such a high phenomenon of women fucking up their lives and then being miserable and blaming everybody else. And fucking up everybody else's lives to make up for it. In any case, we will continue with the article next week. I think we stopped at opposition for women's suffrage because Jane Grey Swisshelm didn't believe the government would last for another 10 years. And I got off on a kick of women growing the government instead of shrinking it. It would have been better if they had eliminated it. What we've got today, is just exponentially terrible. It's not just bad for us, it's bad for the whole fucking world. So, there you go. I've read all of the super chows. I've read all the super chats, and I have read the Rumble rant that we got. We have, in our after show, we've been reading an article. The original title of the article is 69 Things Trump Has Said About Women. And we've been reading through the things. This is a listicle. By every definition of listicle. The guy that is writing it has literally just posted quotes. And they're not even full quotes or accurate quotes. He's had some quotes that he posted that when you actually start looking for the source material, the first part of the quote is from one statement and the second part of the quote is from another statement. And the writer put them together to make a quote that looks bad because two things were combined that he didn't even say at the same time. So it's kind of interesting, but the best part is kind of watching a feminist man freak out. He's not describing why he thinks these things are bad. He's just posting them. And a lot of them are perfectly reasonable things to say. And the ones that maybe aren't as popular or politically correct today, there's nothing in them to make them false observations. Some of them are statements of opinion on women's looks, for instance. So the guy that ran the Miss America pageant isn't allowed to comment on women's looks. But yeah, so that's what we're doing in the after show right now. We're just looking at sort of what does this guy think it was inappropriate for Trump to say, and he seems to have held the grab them by the pussy comment, wherein Trump acknowledged that men who have wealth and clout are able to tell that some women's conditions for what they will accept for men, some women's standards on what they will accept from men, change depending on how much wealth and clout a man has, right? Women got really upset about that quote, by the way, right? But yeah, he seems to have saved that quote for later because we haven't run into it yet.
I'm so sick of that goddamn quote. I swear to God. I
love that quote. I absolutely love that quote.
I love the quote. I fucking love the quote too. I love the quote too because it's so goddamn true. It's so honest. Yeah. And it was said in such a moment of like honesty. You know what I mean? Like he just said what it's so true. And everybody's losing their shit as if they don't know that this is the case. Everybody knows what a fucking groupie is. Everybody, every fucking music genre knows what they've all had their groupies. Every single one of them. Okay, we know what a group is. It's a well, and it's almost a household name that isn't really ever said because of how disgusting and dirty it is.
Yeah.
But it's true. It's true. And oh my god. Okay, well maybe you wouldn't let Trump grab you by your pussy, bitch. But that doesn't mean that there's not someone who would. You know, it just because again, it just strips the agency away from women. Yes,
Yeah.
there are some women who would. Yup, and it's their absolute goddamn right to do so. What are you gonna say about it, bitch?
Well, and the fact is, some women are gold diggers, and some women are clout chasers. Some women are both, and it is fair to call them that when they do it. And it's not,
right.
It's not a statement about all women. And if a woman feels called out by that, maybe she should examine her motives. Why are you upset at the acknowledgement that some women do these things if you're not one of the women involved?
Right.
So, but anyway, yeah, so that's what we're doing in our after show. I didn't do my spiel at the beginning about Feed the Badger and honeybadgerbrigade.com. So I will point out before we leave, if you want to be part of that, check out feedthebadger.com. Feed the Badger is where you can help us out without relying on any third-party payment platform that might be subject to that social manipulation, that micromanagement, that DEI imposition that our government has so kindly put into banking and all of the financial businesses in the world. We at least have one more degree of separation between us and that at feedthebadger.com than we do from any other social crowdfunding platform. So, and that it'll give you a way to join our Discord, the paid part of our Discord. It'll give you a way. You can also join the free part of our Discord, and you can find that information on honeybadgerbrigade.com, the drop-down menu at the top of the page, as well as a link to all of our other activities online and stuff. But again, it's feedthebadger.com that you would look for if you aren't able to get in and view the after shows and you want to be able to. That's where to go to support us enough to be able to do that. So because our after shows are patron only. So with that, I will say thanks to my two co-hosts for again. This is dry going through this, but it's information that people really have forgotten. So thanks for sticking out the freeze-dried sausage. Thanks to all the
technical difficulties
and the
of the
technical
price we pay for getting here.
Yeah. Thanks to the listeners for your patience with the technical difficulties. And all my cussing about the technical difficulties.
And all my cussing.
Yeah. All like, we're probably more profane than the men. It's really bad.
Oh my God. So, I don't... So, there was a coworker of mine that recently just got fired for basically saying the N-word in an inter-office memo.
Oops.
And it was directed at me. Well, yeah, directed at me. But, if you knew the things that I would love to say that I just can't say because I'm at work, holy shit, that fire me. Are you kidding me? They would blast me into orbit for my opinions and the things that I would say. He got fired for saying nigga. Oh my God.
Yeah. See, I had a workplace years ago where I could say anything I wanted. It was a small business, and It's out of business now. I wasn't working for the business when it went out of business. I'd moved to Dayton by that point, and it's up in Lima. But it went out during the Obama end of the Bush-Obama recession. Just couldn't survive the whole long term of that, and everything. But I worked with 2 men and another woman, and the woman that I worked with was as old as my parents, and so once they figured out I was comfortable with just about anything, then it was pretty much, and it was the most fun place I ever worked. So outside of my family business,
but that's your eyes and ears. It's you trusting your eyes and ears.
Yeah.
Like that's some kind of authority. When you should be trusting the big ol' eyes and the big ol' ears that do the things that your eyes and ears should not do. Do you got that?
Yeah. Gotta trust Big Brother. So the only problem is my big brother was younger than me. So, but he was bigger than me by the time I was 5. But he was younger than me. So.
It would be more accurate to refer to this entity as auntie.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny how the BBC likes to refer to itself as auntie.
Wine auntie is watching you.
Yes.
That is pretty much the state of things today. So, to Wine Auntie and the rest of you, I will say good night and see you next Thursday.
Men's right activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.